So to begin, the first location is called Building A. So it contains 3 stories divided into 20 cells. The first one has 10 cells used for jailing, interrogation, and torture. Let me get closer so I can read better. And torture the prisoners who had been the high officials. The second and third ones have 5 big cells each, used for the same procedures as on the first story. Nowadays, there are a lot of evidence remaining in all the cells which prove the atrocities of Pol Pot's clique. So let's check out. This is building A. As you can tell, there is 1, 2, 3 levels, and there are a lot of classrooms. So each classroom had 20. So hold on a second. First one has 10 cells used for jailing. So, okay, so 3 stories divided into 20 cells. Okay, so these cells are much larger than the cells that we will see later on. But this is quite interesting because this compound used to be a high school. So the high school, Pol Pot and the Cameroons turned it into prison pretty much to harbor anybody who was deemed to be a threat of their regime and what they were trying to accomplish. So pretty soon we will go check out a few cells with our tour guide, who was 8 years old when this happened, fled to Vietnam. She was young with her mother. Sun is out. So here is one of the detaining rooms where they would torture not just Vietnam soldiers but also Cambodians as well, and they would tie them up here with a chain, feed them only porridge, maybe not even a meal at all throughout the days, and usually we'll send them to the killing fields 6 months later to kill them. So here is somebody who I think a soldier. This was, name of prisoners on loan. This is unknown. This bed with the sun and water line on both sides has remained in this room. So here's what it looked like. Of course, the face is blanked out. I think I lost my tour guide. Oh, there's another one here. So here is another room. And this was used because it was easier to kill using electric shock. We're gonna see some of the rules that they had. Pardon me. So they created barriers to eliminate communication or even just some form of dialogue between the prisoners. So there were at least 1 to 2 people in each cell. You knew somebody was next to you, but you couldn't speak or even see them until it was time to get put together to go to the killing fields. And this was created to make a door into each classroom. It's not a real door. It was just created by the Khmer Rouge to make it easier to walk around for them. Some of these still has the torture device that they would use, so you can see that right there. You can see some chains right there. Excuse me. Thank you. Quite sad. So I'm not gonna show the name, but there's a name on some of the cells for the prisoners that were detained in there. So each classroom had roughly 16 cells. So we're now walking through what used to be a high school. So kids used to walk around, play, laugh, learn, and it was transformed into a prison by the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot. So we're going to another classroom right now. Let's see how many cells are in here. So each of the cell, each cell had about 1 to 2 people. So we're going to exit out of one of the cells. There's not much space over here, as you can tell. And then you knew someone was to the left and right of you, but you couldn't see them or you couldn't really speak because you were not allowed to. Once again, this used to be a high school. You know, quite eerie to think about. We recently went through an area that showed just how many victims, and these were the documented ones. Of course, you couldn't take any photos, videos, and some people were, but I'm okay. I tried to follow rules, and also out of respect, because there was actual photos of members, either right before they died or during times of starvation and torture. And I don't think that's right to show that. So, but there were countless victims photographed. And once again, these were the documented ones and the ones that people of Cambodia have knowledge of. For example, our tour guide, she doesn't know how her siblings died. She doesn't know if they died by labor or by starvation or what. She doesn't know. So once the Khmer Rouge caught wind that the Vietnamese soldiers were coming in here, they took all the prisoners, all the victims, and then they pretty much killed them. But there were 4 children that survived. There's a total of them down there. When some of the Vietnamese soldiers came in, that's who they encountered, the last members of the area. They were quite young. There's 4. There's 2 toddlers, and the other 2 look like they are maybe between 6 and 9, quite young. All right, so we just finished. We are now going to make our way back to the bus and head to the killing fields to go and learn more about that. But man, this is almost about 2 million people died during this time. What's going on? Oh, it's a myth. Okay. Interesting. We're gonna find our bus. Excuse me. Am I what? Not really. I just started. Yeah. I just started doing it. Yeah, about 2 months ago. Yeah. You have come to the killing field? Yes, I'm going there right now. We'll have the bus. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, there you are. So here's a quick layout of S21. We have building A right here. We have building B. We have building C. And building D. So each had their specific purpose. So this was where high-ranking military members or those who were deemed to be a big threat were kept. Once again, this used to be a high school. So as you can tell, it resembles much like a high school. You have the courtyard right here. You have the buildings, the classrooms. All right. So over here is where we saw a lot of the victims that were brutally All right, so we are at the second part of this experience. We are at Choeung Ek Genocidal Center. This is also known as the killing fields. So after members would be tortured for days, weeks, months, normally months, they were sent here by trucks at night to be killed. And at first, the numbers went from 20 to 50, but as time went on, the numbers increased and the frequency of the bus trips increased as well, going from once a week to every day, holding about 500 people to be killed. This all at night. So we're going to learn more about how this happened and how they use certain tactics and skills to minimize those who are working, to minimize suspicion from those who are working in the field, as well as just more about this general area and what went on here.
That's what happened in 1975 to 1970. This is
Place where a truck transporting victims to be exterminated from Tuol Sleng Prison, or S21, which is where we were at previously, and other places in the country stopped. The truck would arrive 2 or 3 times a month. Each truck held 20 to 30 frightened, blindfolded, and silent prisoners. When the truck arrived, the victims were led directly to be executed at the pits or were sent to be detained in the dark and gloomy prison nearby. After January 7, 1979, one truck remained, but it has been taken away since. And here is a drawing of what things look like. As you can see, the trucks. That's the Khmer Rouge regime members, and the people were blindfolded as they entered the area. So this killing field is, or was, one of more than 300 killing fields that were spread out through the country. There are plenty of areas that have been undug where bones of people are still buried underneath. So once again, this is one of 300 in the country of Cambodia, one of 300 killing fields. And imagine being done by your own people as well too, all because they were unhappy with French colonialism and French influence, and they had idea to try to change things, and they thought that the best way to change things were through agriculture and through farming. So they wanted to get everybody out of the city. They did not like cities, or I guess Pol Pot did not like cities. The goal was to get everybody out of the city onto the countryside and farm. But of course, more than that occurred. So we're gonna go explore more areas of the Choeung Ek Genocidal Center. Okay, so we are at number 3 of our stop, called the Dark and Gloomy Detention. So here it says it was the place where victims were transported from Tuol Sleng, or S21, and other places in the country to be detained. Usually when the truck arrived, the victims were executed immediately. Someday, as the number of victims to be executed was increased up to over 300 per day, executioners failed in an attempt to kill them within a day. That is why they were detained for execution the next day. The detention was constructed from wood with galvanized steel roof. Its wall was built with 2 layers of flat wood where to darken and also prevent prisoners seeing each other. Unfortunately, the dark and gloomy detention was dismantled in 1979. So that's crazy. So if they were not able to be executed on that day when they arrived here, they were kept in this structure awaiting to be killed tomorrow. And they minimized communication and seeing each other because it was dark in there. That's so sad. Pretty much like a lot of dictatorship targeted youth, youth that were already in poverty and coming from hard times, and then using the idea that city dwellers were the ones that were causing the differences between them and causing the difference between classes, as well as for their suffering. So through initiation and through brainwashing and through false promises of food, better life, steady job, good pay, he was able to recruit young boys to help do the dirty work, quote unquote. And that's how the Khmer Rouge was able to amass such large numbers. So you can see here is a photo of what the working office used to look like. And here are some young men in the front side doing that. We're gonna go on to number 5. So the thing about so the reason why the Khmer Rouge decided to transport members from S21 at night, because there were still people working on the fields here. So at nighttime, they will play music that will drown out the sound of the killing, so that the people that were working would not be alarmed or cause any kind of red flags or an eyebrow raise. And right now we are standing in front of an area that used to house chemicals, DDT. Such an example is one of them. There were many different chemicals that were housed here, but DDT is an example of one. And the executioner scattered the substance over dead bodies of the victim at once after execution. And this had 2 purposes. First, to eliminate the stench from the dead bodies, which could cause potential suspicion among people working near the field, working by the killing field. And the second was to kill off victims who were still alive. The chemical substance in the storage room was lost in 1979. So members, once they were pushed into the graves, were still alive, and some were not dead. But the chemicals, such as DDT, was used to make sure that that was not the case anymore. And once again, they played music during this at nighttime. You know, yeah, can you imagine, leaving an area that you've been tortured in for months, right? And now you're blindfolded, you're coming to another area, you're promised a false life. You pretty much lied to you, saying you're gonna go to a new place, better home. But some did not believe that. Some knew what was gonna happen. And then, you come here blindfolded, you don't know what's going on, and then you're just pretty much killed because you're thought to be a threat. Because you're either educated, you had a good job, you wore glasses, or you had soft hands, which indicate that you had not struggled or worked hard in your life. Those who were smart had soft hands, wore glasses, had good jobs as lawyers, teachers, doctors, were thought to be a threat to the new life that Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge wanted to build, because they did not want high class or any other citizens. They wanted farmers. They wanted to build a society built on agriculture. So if you had no experience in that, if your hands were soft, you were deemed to be a threat of what they were trying to build. So we're gonna move on to number 7. we have former bottom of a warehouse containing chemicals, other evidence. The chemical DDT, powder coated in fragments of ceramic bowl, used for collecting chemical powder. Folding knife used for cutting sack bags or used as can opener. Segment of a military metal necklace. A piece of a foot shackle. Tire sandal sole of a Khmer Rouge soldier. So over here is a mass grave of 450 victims that laid here. 450. So over here housed the killing storage room. They did not use bullets because bullets were expensive. Instead, they used tools such as shackles, leg irons, hatchet, knives, hoes, digging hoes, shoves, iron axe carts, axles. The storage room was constructed from wood with galvanized steel roof. But once the Khmer Rouge disassembled and fled, these tools were lost. So one slogan that Pol Pot had was, better to kill an innocent by mistake than to spare an enemy by mistake. So there were a lot of confessions, right? But some of these confessions were not true, you know, and the reason why it was not true because they were forced to write that. And that was what justified Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge to kill these innocent people. So many people, right, if they were thought to be scholars, they were assumed to be spies for CIA or KGB. So some had no business, some had no relations to any of that, of those agencies, or had no threat to Cambodia. But because they were scholars, had good jobs, many of them were to forced to falsify their confessions, saying that they were spies or they had plans to dissemble, you know, Pol Pot's new regime, or whatever, anything that had them as an enemy in Pol Pot and the Khmer regime's eyes. So there were a lot of falsified as the documents went along. So the Khmer regime were really precise with the documentations because they wanted to make sure that they killed everybody. So they documented every single prisoner, all to the best that they possibly could, because they did not want to miss anybody. And they wanted to make sure they had accountability. So they were extremely strict with their record keeping and how they kept it, the process they went about doing that, all for the purpose of just accountability purposes. Make sure that they did not forget anybody or that somebody was gone missing before they started doing the mass killing at the killing fields. So we're gonna head on to the next site. So before Paul and the Khmer Rouge, this used to be a grave site for the Chinese community. So Pol Pot just pretty much took this and then made it his grave site. So the sign says former Chinese grave. So in this location, there are over 100 members from the Cameroon regime who are buried here. So Pol Pot, like many dictators, was awfully paranoid, right? Because once you have such power and you know what you're doing is wrong, and you know that your your organization is sensitive to change, you start questioning those around you and questioning their motives, their movements, anything. So, oftentimes, if members disobeyed rules or they did not behave accordingly, they were killed swiftly. Or if Pol Pot suggested or had suspicion that they were against him and the regime, they were killed swiftly as well too. Oftentimes, they were emulated as well as cut up before being killed to show, what will happen if you do not follow the rules or you give him some kind of suspicion that you are not with the regime anymore. So once again, many of his soldiers were, 17, 16-year-old when they joined, and through brainwashing, through fear of being killed, as well as fear of just what's to come, they went ahead and were robots and committed such atrocities, such heinous acts, against their own people, off of fear. So, but as time went on, they gained more enemies, and he got more nervous, and then he started acting irrational as time went on because the regime was slowly dissembling, and they toppled down in January. So it was about a 4 year. I'll double check this. I'm going off of memory, but from what I saw, it was about a 4 year regime rule that they had over their own people, committing such acts. Quite sad. Quite sad. So we were on the opposite direction down there. Once again, there are over 100 bodies of soldiers from the Khmer Rouge regime in this body of water. But I think also maybe here too, if I had to guess. So here we have the cherry tree. Cherry tree is apparently what Buddha laid or sat underneath when he gained enlightenment. But the cherry tree was used to house speakers, loudspeakers, which made the sound louder to avoid hearing the moans of the victims, as well as the killing, the slaughtering of innocent people that went on here. As I mentioned earlier, they used, the members were transported at night so they would not be seen, and they were also killed swiftly at night. And to not be heard or to eliminate suspicion from those who were working here, they put loudspeakers on this tree to drown out the sounds of what they were doing. So it was used as a tool to hang a loudspeaker which made sounds louder to avoid the moan of victims while they were being executed. So babies and children were killed in a really gruesome fashion. Oftentimes they were killed by two manners, either thrown up to the sky and then shot at, or they smashed their head against trees and other devices. And here is a tree called Chan Kiri tree, killing tree. It's a tree which the executioners smashed the children's heads against. Killing tree. So here is a mass grave of more than 100 victims of children and women who were pushed in here into this pit. So this all occurred at night, done secretly and swiftly, all drowned out by music.
So the mass grave in front of you here tell us that everyone inside
Excuse
was
me.
naked body.
So oftentimes, when one family member was murdered, the whole family followed suit because they did not want revenge or anybody to plot against Khmer Rouge. So let's say if a father was perceived to be a threat, whether because he wore glasses, he had a really good job, whatever it may be, he will be murdered. So will be the wife and the kids, if they had kids. And oftentimes they were separated, so they were not together. The men stayed with the men, women stayed with the women and the children. But most of them had the similar end results, unfortunately. So we are back at square one. What I will do is I will give a proper video to explain what happened. It's an introduction as we go along before this whole thing gets edited.